Good morning, everyone. I know people still come in, but you have already heard the fancy stuff, exciting products, the landscape of AI overall, and also what people are doing with data. Of course, specifically building models, doing all this exciting work to increase productivity. And now I'm just going to tell some stories. Maybe we should just have a conversation. My role has changed. So I used to be the highly technical guy. So my training is I have a doctorate degree in math, really, and economics. And we did all this modeling in the beginning was with trading, marketing. And later, we built a data science team. But now I think I'm going to tell some stories about how we did some of the work and now how we can make this really what you can do, bring this back to maybe your company to make things happen, and maybe you can get some promotions. Yeah. So with that, I'm gonna start with the. Oh, which way is this going? It's not working. Oh, there we go. So briefly, just the agenda. Of course, you probably have seen most of the things that people talking about with a similar nature. Just big data, of course, they talk about it all the time, and kind of in general, what challenge does it present? What really opportunity does it give us? So we talk about that just a little bit. Then we talk about the monetizing data. People talk about it, data is oil, data is assets. I say data is money. So how do we monetize data? I'm not just talking about selling data. A lot of times you hear from consulting firms, sometimes technology firms, for example, Google in particular, they would like to work with you and buy your data. And we don't probably kind of casually sell data to them. I'm talking about monetizing by building models, delivering insights, help us to make decisions better, to increase revenue and to do savings. That's what we're talking about. And I said creative kind of a funding model, you would say, after all, it's not so creative. But hey, let's see. So we're going to talk about that. How do you get funded, right? Then, of course, eventually, you don't want to do this piece by piece, piecemeals. You want to get to the next level, right? To help the company to build an ecosystem of products, then to help the company to make decisions in the new kind of era, right? To help them. Then we're going to talk about some takeaways. So the first one, as you can see, I have this chart there, but mostly it's just the center is big data. So what are we talking about big data? So I'm not going to talk about, for example, what Amazon has been doing. Google, of course, they're the expert in terms of managing and deriving value from the big data. So just the firm, the utility, energy firms, I'm talking about, for example, for generation. You all probably have seen kind of the new sensor, wave, right? We installed all these sensors on generations, different components, 5 seconds, 15 seconds, all this data. Where did it go? Nobody knows because it's hard. It's very hard to process all this data to derive kind of the insights. So that in terms of the volume of the data, in terms of how fast the data comes in, it's very hard. That's the challenge. And also AMI, right? So AMI, most of the companies, you would basically store or save processing 15 minutes. Actually, you can go to 5-minute interval. All this data, how do you maximize the value of that? Now, of course, the social media, in terms of how we interact with customers, right? That's so many things that we just talk about. The big data, big data, but okay, now how do we turn that into money? That's kind of so I use the 3V and the 3S, right? I use this the first time I used this, it was like in Boston, 2015. That's when they just hired me because initially I was the head of front office operations at trading and marketing. And then 2015, they named me the head of analytics in doing AI data science. So I came back from Boston. That's when we started I use these three terms, 3V, right? Volume, velocity, and value. This is talking about data specifically. Then, of course, to deliver that, you can't do this piecemeal. So I talk about scope, scale, and speed. The way you do it is, it doesn't matter how slowly, how gently you start. But when you actually go to action, you have the vision of, okay, now eventually, how would this turn into something big, more systematic? So I always talk about scope, scale, and speed. So that's kind of what I say the challenge and opportunity. Of course, some of you may have already heard, for example, the data on the internet. Sometimes they say it's in terms of customer behavior, they're buying, selling, what they're checking kind of on social media. People are saying there's a kind of 6 seconds rule. If you, for example, Google, Amazon, if they can turn the how people are interacting with on social media, with the computer within 6 seconds, then that's true value. After 6 seconds, they said that the value goes down by like 75%, something like that. For us, it's not like that, but still, in terms of how fast you can return this into value, is also very, very important. So big data is already here. So how do we make the most of it? How we kind of make sure we are left behind, right? So we need to put this heads on. Then instead of talking about a why and a how, AI can help us do all these things. I'm just use a few examples. Some of you asked, for example, earlier about how, where they are in terms of what products they have built. And Duke Energy, I think, now I'm no longer working for Duke Energy, I retired. But I think in terms of what they have been able to do, I think they're the industry leaders in terms of, kind of started with Hadoop in terms of data, clouds, AI functions. You all talk about it kind of for the asset management side, the wedge management, of course, revenue protection, storm response, the prediction. How do you make arrangement about kind of AMI data patterns using, for example, AMI data, analyze what people are doing. Is somebody stealing energy or somebody has a bad meter, right? We generated like tens of millions of dollars, right? So that's the type of thing. And customer energy optimization, that's kind of how we help customers to manage their home. So sometimes you talk about data in a very kind of a general sense, right? But data truly sometimes is amazing. For example, if you think about the customer data, even if you just look at a 5-minute interval, 15-minute interval data, do you know how you can use data science AI to identify just based on the flow of data, just one number, okay, every 15 minutes, one number, where then you can actually tell is this somebody, are they using gas? Or are they using electricity for heating? What are the kind of appliances that they have? Do they have big, like cooking top, or do they have, 3 fridges or just one? This is pretty amazing. You can do the decomposition based on feature. I call that data feature recognition, also pattern recognition. So our team did that. And actually, as a matter of fact, we use that to replace a commercially developed system, of course, with 10% of the cost, both capital and also the O&M spends. Then the performance was like way better than before, right? So what I use the example is that using data science, using machine learning. I put it like 4 examples there, but really we had a portfolio of products. So in particular, I would mention kind of also the best action. I kind of started from the bottom, but I talk about also maybe best action, of course, is just very similar to kind of the companies like Amazon, right? So they tell you what product, they recommend the product to you. Google the same way. this is basically based on people making phone calls, people playing stuff on the internet, and also the general features about how they behave in general, social media, so on, kind of recommend to them non-energy products. For example, Duke Energy, they used to have I think between 50 and 60 non-energy based products. So they offer, kind of people based on how they behave on the electronic space, right? The image processing, this is particularly important, I think, in the early on. And someone mentioned, for example, the solar panels. Oh, maybe I think your VP of products. He said, okay, maybe based on how the kind of the electricity is coming or not, you can see the fluctuations that determine whether or not maintenance is needed or a particular panel needs to be replaced. Actually, we do image processing. We have flyovers. Drone flyovers take millions, hundreds of millions of pictures. So you use AI to process the images. So remember, use human eyes is impossible, but you use AI, you can pinpoint where, for example, the dirt is getting too high, too thick, and where, for example, a particular panel or area of panels needs to be replaced. So this is, you don't have to see the actual impact, because when you see for example, the efficiency is already down by 2%, it's too late, because you already lost the opportunity of generating more, right? So you actually do the image processing for asset management. Of course, the storm the same way, right? You take, the transmission line, also the distribution line. It takes tons of pictures about all this, kind of little pieces, right? So, which right now probably I don't want to mention specifically. Then use the image processing to determine once again what needs to be replaced. So that's some of the examples I would want to mention that then we, as a kind of a company, use AI, machine learning, to derive revenue and to really generate savings. So now, as I said, we all know that that's really cool to be able to use AI, use machine learning, but how do you actually do it? Just think about it. Utility. Once again, I'm not trying to badmouth utilities, but utilities, we are followers. We're not innovation leaders. We say we are, even Duke Energy. If you look at how they make investment, right? They only make investment when they see the immediate value you can deliver. So typically they're followers, not leaders. Because of that, we really need to be very creative in terms of how to work in different spaces to be able to get funding, to get going in terms of innovation, right? Build products, so on and so forth. Then I mentioned that I think since some of you are not from utility, probably you don't really know that the rate case cycle dominates this business model. You probably don't know what that means. For utilities, what they do is they would build up their O&M, so on and so forth. They would file the rate case. Rate case basically determines how they collect their revenue. Once a rate case is determined, typically there's a 5-year, 10-year, sometimes a little longer, sometimes once that cycle is done, there's no way for them to increase their revenue other than load growth. Then how do we generate earnings? How do we increase their earnings, or how do they manage their earnings? By doing what? From utilities, what do they do? The revenue side has been set. How do we increase more earnings? Lower cost management. So therefore, they look at each penny, they squeeze each penny where they spend. So for operations, they cannot afford to really shirk off on the maintenance of generation or transmission or distribution. It doesn't matter. It's investment, it's O&M or capital. They have to be very careful. So therefore, if you come to the CEO, come to CFO saying, okay, no, I have a big idea. I want to do, innovation. I have this AI stuff, we can do it. What is he going to tell you? Oh, that sounds good. Then you keep doing PowerPoints, right? This is the cycle. Keep doing PowerPoints. Now, first time it didn't work. Okay, let's help McKinsey. We did some PowerPoints. Let's have SAS come in and do some PowerPoints. They keep doing this, right? It's very hard to get them going because they really want to manage the most critical areas to make sure that's running. Even with IT. So our colleague here is from IT. Even with the IT technology space, right? So what's their priority? First, they want to make it secure. If anything goes wrong in terms of security, get out here, right? So what's the second thing? Stability, right? So my operation must be stable and smooth. So you test, okay, now let's do innovation. Okay, hold on. See if I have an extra change for you, right? I mean, this is not no joking matter. So it's really, that's why utility will usually very slow in terms of in the kind of innovation AI space, right? Even, for example, we talk about the data platforms moving into the cloud. How do they do that? How fast, how slow? Typically there's a lot of resistance. Then I say the fear factor. The fear factor about developing AI capabilities. Who can tell me, have you heard about this term in your company when you talk to people, your colleagues, about AI, about machine learning? There's a fear factor. What are we talking about? Can anyone can, this is a conversation, right? Have you heard? But okay, now AI, what are you going to do? Okay, anyone? Can I go ahead?
So yeah, so I've seen it as well. When there is something on the edge, for example, right, that is happening, and you have to tell somebody to do an investigation there, right? They don't trust, the result of a model. Let's say you need to do something if they cannot see it visually.
Yeah.
Right. So there might be something, from an impedance or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Might happen on a meter in very low voltage. If they cannot see it, they will not trust it, even though the data that is behind it is telling you that there is a problem, from an impedance perspective or path perspective.
Good. So I would call that's dimension one. There are a few dimensions, right? Dimension number one is people, because AI is a new thing, because the fact you cannot explain every element of AI. By the way, that's why banks, they don't use AI. You're not allowed to use AI to do market evaluations because you cannot, for example, I testify, for example, from the commission. If you tell them use AI for determining the value of this thing, they will tell you, go do it again, right? So, but you're allowed to do this in operations. So basically, kind of as you mentioned, they're fearful because you cannot explain 100% for every element. What about the human kind of, what about me thing? That's from that perspective. Anyone? Go ahead.
I think we are fearful that, as utilities, so much is based on engineering, like an engineering stamp.
Yeah.
And so here we are, instead of letting a physical engineer go through something, stamp it, verify it, that we're putting it into the black box and letting the black box spit out a result, replacing that human person that was looking over every aspect of it. We just wonder, our fear is, what have we missed if we use AI?
Okay, good. That's good. Okay, anyone else? So I want to hear more about the fear factor. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. couple things that I've heard, within my industry, then also outside of it is, that AI could somehow expose sensitive company data, to externally facing data. Sensitive data could be externally facing. And the other one I've also heard, maybe not so much in the utility industry, but in general, is that AI is going to replace me, right? I'm not going to have a job anymore because it's going to be done by AI.
Yes. The two you mentioned, that's the most frequent mentioning of the fear factor. One is, okay, no, AI is going to screw us because we don't know how this data is going to be used and where is it going to go, right? Because you don't have 100% control. But the last one you mentioned is also very real. For example, I have 40 engineers under me. Not me. I'm using this example. I'm working in nuclear, I'm working in generation. I have 40 engineers doing this specific job, determining, for example, the pump, whether or not it's working properly. Is there leakage? I have this AI thing to help you to do this. So I only need one engineer. This one engineer to help me make sure, you have this general observation examination, right? Once the decision is made, you do a few things to check it out. So what about the 39 engineers? Even in the IT space, technology space, we talk about, for example, managing data in a better way, right? So with cloud, with this AI things, now if we tie everything together, it's going to be better, faster. But what about reporting? In the past, for example, if you're running a reporting team, right? You generate all this reporting. You have 75 people to make sure all this environmental compliance stuff is reported, coash, everything else, right? Now you don't need this many people. People will say, okay, what about me? What's things going to do to me? So even in the technology space, people have that kind of concerns. That's very unfortunate because we say AI can never replace human beings. It would give us an opportunity to do better things. If we should, every one of us should have the confidence. I can always be retrained, so I don't have to do this very basic SQL query code every day. I can become a thinker. I can do better things, right? So people should have, but unfortunately, especially in the utility space, no. You know what that would do? Because of the fear factor, what happens? If you're a mid-level manager, you yourself have the same thoughts. Are you going to support me? When I come to you and say, okay, now I'm going to do this together, and you don't need 75 people. You need 15. What are you going to do? I don't think you're going to say, oh, Ben, let's talk about it. But in reality, you're not going to support me wholeheartedly, necessarily, right? So all this come together, make it very hard for us to get support, get funding. And then, of course, I would talk about some examples, a few things to how we really did it and how we think you can do it. I think the best scenario, I have been, of course, as you are all probably working across industry, right? See how other industries are making it happen. Especially, for example, in the Walmarts, I suppose Lowe's and how they do things in retail, general marketing, sales, outside. Of course, technology space, you don't have to worry about that at all, right? So how do they do it? I think the most ideal scenario is your CEO, he or she, themselves, they are strong believers and they had some background. I don't mention this specific name. Actually, there's this giant company. Their CEO used to be a manager of analytics. So he's a big believer of all this, right? So that's the most ideal scenario for you to kick off really your data management AI. And of course, that's very rare. The second, I would say the Next level would be, if you're a chief commercial officer, maybe your COO, maybe somebody, a chief kind of a customer officer, they somehow, really is a innovator in their minds. That's kind of that was my situation. I had a boss, I don't want to mention his name actually anymore, but he was a believer day one. Even when we started building the team, in the very beginning, 2015, when I started, for example, I had like 5 employees and 2 contractors. That was our data science team. And he saw this so clearly. He said, Ben, go build a strategy and go hire people and go do this work. Make sure you build an organization. Of course, by the kind of time I left, after like 6 years, I think we had 200 plus people. Yeah, so how did we do it specifically? The first one is I said, as I already mentioned, with all the things I already talked about, the first thing they would ask you, if no matter you're talking about a kind of the head of a generation, maybe the VP of operations in a generation side, or somebody who's responsible for wedge management, or somebody who's responsible for sales of non-energy products, so on and so forth. The first thing, what's the first thing they're going to ask you? You go to them and say, okay, sit down. Okay, now let's talk about how do we do data in a better way? How do we use AI to, what's the first thing they can ask you? Of course, if you come to them and said, okay, now I need $5 million, I'm going to do this for you. Or the worst thing you can do in kind of in the utility space is okay, now I build this tool. I'm looking for a use for it. Nobody likes that. So that's why I think, for example, when we work with SaaS, with different companies, we don't really kind of tell our managers that way. It's okay, now, okay, we work with SaaS. They have this fancy, suite of products. Let's find a use for it. We don't do that. We first do what? Okay, they would ask you build a use case portfolio, right? But for these people, what's the one thing they can ask you? Show me the money. Yes, show me the money. So therefore, you build, of course, pipeline of use cases. And you in back of your mind, SaaS is excellent company. They already have some things you can leverage, right? You have that in your mind, but you don't start that way. I have these things. I'm like, let's find a use. No, that's not going to work. So you start with. So I call this a kind of, if they ask you to show you the money, make it very specific. So I define the value in 3 categories. Some of you probably already heard is revenue, savings, and cost avoidance. The most kind of attractive thing they want to hear is, okay, now I can help you to increase your revenue by $10 million. They would immediately say, oh, really? Okay, now show me how. You can't trick them, right? Because you have to go through the POC, MOE, right? MVP, kind of the cycle. But when you do that, kind of POC and MVP, actually there's benefit coming in. So in other words, you don't just show them the features, how that works. They actually see the benefit of it. So revenue is the number one thing that gets their attention. The second thing is the savings, of course. If you tell them if I do this, you can save this much money, they also would be welcoming. Okay, everyone, if you are a manager or you are a director, VP, or you manage a budget, right? In utility, as I already mentioned, the budget process is very challenging, right? If they already have a budget, they know they cannot deliver. There's a big gap. I used to be told this, Ben, how can you help me to solve this budget gap? Because every year, as I mentioned, they manage costs, right? So last year, your budget for your team is $15 million. This year, they say, okay, now what about 13? And by the way, When they tell you your budget is 13 million, no longer 15, are they telling you to reduce your work? No, right? So that's usually the situation. So that's really the window of opportunity when you come in. So you know what? You have a $10 million gap. I can help you to actually solve that. Then they was, okay, now tell me how. Then you come in and generally, because you start with a, kind of once again, you build a use case, right? But in your mind, it's just kind of all this, the methodically determine the pros and cons and logistics. But when you present to them, you just start with, okay, now I can help you to solve the $2 million gap. Then you come in with everything you already prepared, right? Then do, of course, once they're convinced, they say, okay, now I want to, I can chip in $100,000 if you can do a POCs to show me this and that. That's usually how things start. Then the next category is cost avoidance. I think if you know accounting, cost avoidance is a little bit different from cost savings. Sometimes people don't really pay as much attention, but some of the senior management level, they do pay attention. For example, in supply chain, if you use AI to tell them, you don't need to have 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of the same product, same names installed because A, B, C, and D. You help them to avoid cost. And another big thing I call the cost avoidance is, so I know SaaS, they never do that, because some of the other vendors, they do. They usually, when they come to you, do they usually present you with a fair, minimum required kind of cost structure scope to deliver the most value for you? Usually don't. What do they do? What do they usually do? If I need this, they give you what? They give you this, right? So if you know truly how AI works, how data works, and as the team member of AI team, you can work with the operations sales team when they are determining a particular vendor. You help them. So once again, I'm not saying the vendors are necessarily tricking people. They don't know what you need either. They just want to make sure it's covered, right? So we can help them as a data science team to properly define the scope requirements so that they have just what they need. I use one example, hopefully, because this is an old example. It doesn't really, probably piss anybody off. I talk about the sensor data. This engineer, this GM told me, this is like 5 years ago, I think they spent like $7.5 million to buy a particular application to do a reporting and to generate some general insights. And later on, turned out he only needed 10% of the capabilities because he didn't know how to define the scope, right? That's, think about that. That's not really a whole lot of money. But a lot of times, the utility companies, our thing is not $7.5 million. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So if you help them to properly define the scope requirements based on our expertise and knowledge of what we have done in the AI and data space, you help them to avoid 5, 10, hundreds of millions of dollars. If you can convince them, sometimes we do, then they will say, okay, now I can give you some money to pull this together. Then the number 2, I said, making your case. I use this phrase a lot because in the beginning, that's how this became very popular. I said, spend $1, make 5. Of course, this is not a superficial slogan. You actually want to make sure, I call this really planting the seed. So people start hearing, oh, what does it mean? So for example, our CFO heard about it. Some of the senior management level people that heard about it, they said, what do you mean when spend $1, make 5? Show me. Then, of course, you all have already prepared, right? And show them. Then, of course, you have to make this real. this is actually not hard to do. If you think about it, I know some of you have probably already done some of the work in the utility space. As a technologist, as data scientist, as somebody who work on, all this data, AI thing, right? But make better decisions. If you give me $1, I save you or generate $5. That's very simple to do. You probably already did some of this work. So use this as a metric to convince people. And of course, you do this step by step. So I know we're almost, probably the time is flying fast, but I think let me quickly, maybe run through this. Then funding products help business organizations make their budget. I already mentioned this. And they have a gap. You help them to mitigate the space they are willing to chip in. Then I said, avoid to be bogged down by the top-down budget process, pitfall. This is really interesting. I already mentioned that we can help them narrow the gap. Most of the success we had in the beginning, sometimes actually we got the funding is of tens of millions of dollars, right? Is because they had a huge budget gap. They wanted us to help them to close the gap. But once the word's out, it can become very interesting because now the CFO gets the attention, the attention, right? You get their attention. What he's going to do? He's going to say, okay, now I heard from Ben that his team have been helping you to do A, B, and C, D. I think what about next year? Your budget is going down 10%. You see what I'm saying, right? In the beginning, the budget has been set. Underground, you're helping people to solve the problem. They are willing to give you the money. You fund your projects. You make a way of really kind of delivering value, get some attention. But if this cycle is turning around, it starts from the top down. Then you work kind of trying to help the CFO to cut people's budget. Then people would say, oh, whoa, I don't need AI. I don't need machine learning. So we want to make sure, see, this is a fine balance. So when you're trying to work with people, and make sure you do that, and also partners. Within a company, when you work with people trying to get funding, you always work with a model I call it true partnership. When I say true partnership, I mean give all the credit to them. You're not just helping them to solve their 3 minutes. We're done. So you're just helping them to solve their problems. You're also giving them all the credits. For example, you build all this fancy stuff. You don't want to take the credit away from them. So we used to have a saying that okay, credit means nothing to me. I want the cash. So that's for real. You just want them to say, okay, now they did it. For example, if you're the head of a particular organization, so we want you to go around and tell people, okay, we have this, and now we do this in a different way. So that is very helpful to help you get going. Then eventually, of course, I'm not going to go through this. Eventually, you want to build the ecosystem, right, around him in terms of the value levels down there, organizations you want to touch. So when I say that, this is very important. So I talk about case by case in the beginning, chipping in to show people. So when you were doing that, please don't do piecemeal. You are doing this case by case. But in your head, when you're designing all this, you should always think about, okay, now, even though he's only funding this thing, but in my head, in my team, we have an overall vision about what will be in the future. So when we set the platforms, when we set all the products suites, we do the feature library approach, modularized approach, the application kind of approach. So you do this piece by piece, but once you have the attention of the company executives, now we are doing this, in a kind of more enterprise way. You don't really have to regenerate everything because you already did the research. You already did some of the work. So now you just need to piece them together. So once again, I talk about the feature libraries, talk about the apps you build along the way, then you modularize products, then you just need to leverage and piece them together. So that's the way you eventually make it happen. Now, of course, this, I don't need to do this, kind of everybody knows this. So a few takeaways pretty quickly. So the next generation energy company, utilities, of course, you have to have machine learning and AI. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. Right now, we think about the rate cases. If they start to put pressure on you for determining a rate, because they know potentially you have AI and machine learning can help you to reduce costs. Pretty soon, for example, if I'm sitting on the commission, I'm going to make that a priority. So you have to do that. Then, of course, show value first, then grow generally. Then strategic partners rather than developer versus client. And finally, data has a huge value. Finally, I want to mention one thing. You all mentioned the importance of kind of doing data first, making sure data is clean, data is properly managed. I want to mention these are the two wings of innovation. One is data. One is what? Data science, AI. Typically, 90% of the time, for utility companies, manufacturing companies, they cut the wings of the data scientist, the AI specialist. What do they want? They make them into what? Into data analyst. Because they pay attention. They are equally important. You have to have pure, clean data to make things happen. But just make sure you don't, data scientists, AI specialists, they are freak natures. You know what I mean? So you should give them the wings so that they can fly. You don't take their wings off. So, no, you do data first. Run this query. If you do that, you'll never fly.